Some things just get overdone. Things we get sick of hearing, sick of reading, and the problem is that fiction runs in trends. Everything from a genre to a word can become trendy, can become fashionable, or can just kind of become habitual within the world of art. You start noticing it over time, but eventually it gets to a kind of breaking point. So let's talk about overused words and phrases that appear again and again in fiction that we are all completely sick of at this point. I turned to my patrons for help with this one over at patreon.com/willowtalksbooks, and they came up with some great suggestions. So I'm going to throw in some of mine, some that are just generally very well known, and some that my patrons came up with that I really enjoyed. Tell me yours in the comments as well, and let me know if you're also sick of these phrases. And just before we begin, I have to admit that so many of these come from romance stories. Romance is known for being a very cliched genre, and even when you just have a romantic subplot in a fantasy or a sci-fi novel or whatever, these phrases come up again and again, almost as if when we're talking about love, sex, romance, there's only so many words we can use. I find that kind of hilarious. Let's jump in. Case in point for the romance argument, the very first one that came to mind for me is something I don't see other people having an issue with, or at least not ranting about the way I do in my brain. His lips found hers. But to give romance its credit, this phrase doesn't have to actually be about love or romance. It's pretty much any time a part of your body finds a thing. Like for example, in a fantasy fight scene, someone is pinned to the ground and they can't quite reach their sword. And it might say, her fingers found the sword. It could be used like that as well, I guess. But there's something about it, and it is worst in romance. His lips found hers. There's something so icky in it. Like I kind of picture two faces, both with their eyes closed, just sort of hoping that they're gonna get it right. Just playing a very daring game with each other. Oh no, that's your nose. No, that's something else. No, there we go. His lips found hers. I can't stomach it. Why are we leaving up to our body parts to decide things that our brains can do, that our senses can do? No one talks about this one. And I can't do it anymore. And I can't go any further into the video without talking about the big one, the elephant in the room, the one that by this point has become a meme. And this one can apply to any genre. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Oh my God. Arguably, there's nothing wrong with this phrase. In a bubble, in a vacuum, it can be pretty impactful. I understand what the writer is getting across when they use this. I think the first time I ever read it, I was probably pretty impressed by it. It's a decent bit of imagery. It expresses feeling and tension very, very well. Until at some point we all figured out it works and it's really effective. Until then, well, it's not effective anymore, is it? Because everyone's doing it. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. First time, great. Second time, hang on, I've read that before. Third time, let's stop now. We're done. 5,000th time, I want to make reading illegal. This one's got to stop now. At least for a few decades. Let's let it fall into obscurity until someone dares to use it again. I was talking to my partner about this one. It bugs me, it bugs them, it bugs quite a lot of people actually. If you go online and Google overused phrases in books, a shock of hair. Quite often someone has a shock of hair. That hair is usually blonde or red. I've never seen it used for brown or black hair. Sometimes it's used for a child or a baby. A new baby is born and it's got a shock of blonde hair. Something like that. Why is it a shock? What is shocking about it? When you stop and think about the phrase, it doesn't immediately make any kind of sense, but some of the phrases we talk about here are so commonplace that we assume it's what we should use. So if you're a writer, maybe you're writing your debut novel, maybe you're writing your 100th novel, it's a phrase that has entered the vernacular. It's entered the common parlance. Jesus, I said that in a video. Of literature, that we just go, yeah, it's some blonde hair, it's a shock of blonde, yeah, that's what you say. Why? If this was a thing we said normally, then I would understand. There are so many phrases we say that don't necessarily make a lot of sense. But we say it, we're used to saying it, but this isn't one that we say. It's not something you see out in public. It's just something we use in fiction and no one seems to question it Why is it a shock? And there are also quite a few on this list that I'm going to get into now that are about how men are depicted in stories. Some of these are specifically about romantic scenes or romance fiction, but they could also be used in lots of other genres, anything from fantasy to literary fiction. And the first of that ilk is when his eyes darkened. Now, her eyes could darken, their eyes could darken, but it's usually his eyes usually darken. Again, by itself, this is a perfectly adequate phrase. Someone has just gotten angry. Someone has turned evil, maybe, revealed their true dark side, or they've just lost it. They've gotten really, really upset. They're about to snap. It can be used in lots of different ways. Someone who's cunning is about to reveal their real tendencies, or someone who is good has been driven to anger or madness, and their eyes have darkened. By itself, absolutely fine, but oh my god, I'm sick of reading it. It is so overused at this point. This one is arguably pretty inoffensive. I just wish we could say something else at this point. His eyes darkened. They always f***ing do. And this is another one that bugs me in particular. Very similar to his lips found hers is the word spied. Someone walks into a room and they have a look around and the word spy will be used. In the corner was a desk. At the center of the room, a coffee table. They spied a plant in the corner. Why? Why did they spy it? Why? It's a plant. It's standing in the corner of a living room. Why did they spy it? Why has it been spied? I cannot stand the use of the word spy in fiction, unless we're talking about spies. Why do people spy things? I'm not playing I Spy. I hate this phrase. The one on my Patreon that got the most likes and agreements is very, very similar to the a shock of blonde hair. This comment is from Adam Cook, who said raven-haired. He actually said, I swear to God, every time I read the expression raven-haired, I want to scream. Yeah, absolutely. If you're blonde and your hair is short, I guess, you have a shock of blonde hair. But if you're a woman with long dark hair, it has to be raven-haired. There is no other thing that it could be. And I do think that this is probably used more in fantasy, maybe in horror, just to imply that she is dark in her personality, that there is something gothic and maybe even evil about her, something vampiric. You could definitely imagine a female vampire having raven hair, because the use of raven imagery, a raven, it evokes death. It evokes bleakness and darkness, so I understand it, but not every black-haired woman is raven-haired. Unless she lives in a fantasy world, in which case, absolutely. They're all raven-haired. This one really, really tickled me, and it actually sparked a little conversation. Other people agreed with this as well. Morwenna Rothery said, I hate that men are always growling. Kind of similar to his eyes darkened, it always seems like men are growling. Again, this could be in a romantic scene, a sexual scene, or could be a guy who's just really pissed off. He'll be growling. Women in stories don't growl. Why are they always growling? It's this animalism, right? It feels kind of Twilight. The idea that men are animalistic in a very sexy way and therefore they growl. And the more I think about it, the more bestial it becomes and the more uncomfortable I feel. This is one that I haven't really come across, but I'm mentioning it here to see if you have, so let me know in the comments. Sarah G said, the column of their throat or the shell of their ear. That's not something I think I've come across. But I think that speaks to the kinds of things that I read and the kinds of things that Sarah reads. We're probably different people with different tastes. I can't think of a time when I've read the column of someone's throat in a book, but let me know if you have. I definitely don't love it. Here's a single word that I think is emblematic of a larger concept, trend, I'm not really sure. Shannon Coe pointed out the word acrid or acrid. Thing is, I've never even heard it out loud before. Shannon said it's not a phrase, but I swear I've never heard the word acrid being used IRL, but it's used in almost every book. And this is such a great point about how we write fiction. So often stories are not written in a way that we actually speak, and they shouldn't be. Writing and speaking are different mediums. But there are certain words that you only read. And I think acrid is definitely one of them. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it right because you only ever read it. No one ever uses it. It's usually used in conjunction with a smell and I think an unpleasant smell. Acrid. Unpleasantly bitter or pungent. There you go. Never used it in real life, but I've read it 1,000 times without really thinking about it, and there are so many others. Again, let me know in the comments, what are words that you read all the time in fiction, but no one ever actually says out loud? Keiichi Furuya pointed out one that is also kind of memed at this point, which is, she wasn't like other girls. Like, I have nothing I can add to that, nothing I can say. There's a very good chance that as soon as I just said that, at least one of you rolled your eyes. Like, yeah, not like other girls, the whole pick-me thing. I feel like we're done. I feel like we're moving past that now, right? Because it usually is used with women. Men can be pick-me's too, obviously. But I think we've got enough societal self-awareness that means that we can now move past this not like other girls thing, especially because as soon as something becomes memeified to this extent, we do get sick of it. And it helps us to be self-aware, so we can move forward now. Jennifer Taylor mentioned a chill ran down my spine. That one I don't have a problem with, interestingly. And I think it's just because it's so ubiquitous. It's just a thing that we always hear, we always read. I'm so used to it at this point. But that being said, whenever I read a horror novel and something is described in a very unique and original way, it does catch my eye. Rather than the "a chill ran down their spine," which I expect to always read, if I read it in a different way or I read something similar, it'll catch my eye and I will applaud the creativity while also feeling a unique reaction to it. Because it's not formulaic, I have to process the new interpretation, the new expression of that sensation in a character. A chill didn't run down their spine, something else happened. In fact, God, I wish I could remember it. I was reading a horror novel recently. I think it was a Grady Hendrix book. And the word injection was used. It was like an injection of frost into my veins. It wasn't that. That's not very good. That's just off the top of my head. But it was something like that. It evoked a similar sensation, but it wasn't a chill ran down their spine. It was something else. And I immediately caught it. I thought, wow, that was really, really good. I'm sure it was in the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I'm sure it was. Should have written it down. Anyway, this is a good example of when a phrase is overused to the point that we don't even notice it and we take it for granted. And if anyone at any point decides to write a similar feeling that the character is experiencing in a different way, using a more imaginative simile, metaphor, whatever, it catches your eye and you applaud the author for their ingenuity and originality. It's not much, but it goes a long way. One that is just undeniably sexist is shrill. Two of my patrons actually pointed this one out. That Nerdy Mystic and Elizabeth Fricker both pointed out that shrill is used when describing women. A man has never been shrill in his life. It is just a sexist phrase. If a woman is being described as shrill in a book, it's not guaranteed, I guess, but it might be indicative of the author being a little bit sexist, whatever their gender, because it does feel kind of codified. You say shrill, you are belittling femininity and womanhood. I don't think I'm overreading that, and at least two people agree. Aspen James said, to their core. They were shaken to their core. They were frightened to their core. And they said there has to be a better way to tell your reader that a character feels something deeply. Absolutely. Yes. And if ever, just like with the chill ran down my spine thing, if ever a writer figures out a different way to express that feeling of to my core, to their core, you'll notice it. If they find a way to express that differently, it'll stick in your mind. It makes me think that creativity isn't about reinventing the wheel, but just doing something differently with it. This one is absolutely hilarious. Mascara said, skin tasting of anything other than skin. Oh, she just ran a marathon, but her milky thighs tasted of fresh strawberries. Oh, do shut up. She was a sweaty mess and she needed a bath. But there was an amazing reply to that from that Nerdy Mystic who said, to be fair, I do actually think some underboob sweat smells like apricots. Happy Pride. Another romance one that Amy Zarrett has pointed out is, he kissed her as if he was starving for the taste of her mouth. That is absolutely such a thing. Too often, taste and flavour is used when we talk about romance. And also starving for things. This, again, animalistic behaviour. It is sexy, it is romantic, but you can get creative if you want to. You don't have to always be starving for something. Rachel mentioned a trend right now in horror that things that are white are often fish belly white, or white as a fish's belly. I don't know if I've noticed this one, and now I have to keep an eye out for it. And finally, Sparkling Cyanide said gaping maw is another one that you see in horror quite a lot, and yes, absolutely. This leads me to a kind of final point about how certain words have to be paired together. If you're going to say maw, and you probably are if you're writing a horror story, it has to be gaping. You can't have anything else. The maw can't be shut tight. It's gaping. I don't want to say gaping too many more times. So one final thing I want you to let me know in the comments is, what two words always go together? A noun and an adjective, a verb and an adverb, they always have to be paired together in fiction. It's such a thing. I really hope you've enjoyed this. If you want to take part in videos like this one, you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/willowtalksbooks. I love getting my patrons involved in fun videos like this one. They're always a lot of fun to make, and I enjoy spending a whole video just laughing. Really hope you enjoyed this. Subscribe for books.